Today, I'm going to talk about emotions, energetics, and physiological reactions. Now, how does all this really influence our everyday life? And it's going to be according to an integrative and complementary vision. So we're going to look at various aspects that have to do with the wisdom of ancient science and the science of today. We're going to bring it back to helping us understand the physiological response, neurological response, and emotional response behind everything we do during our lives. When I started over 40 years ago, the concept I had in the beginning was different. Today, it's much more intricate. It's a much more complex picture that I see. There's an intricate interplay between emotions, energetic states, and physiological processes that constitute one of the most complex and fascinating aspects of human health. If we think that anybody who moves, anything we do, from closing our eyes to listening to music, to walking, to reading, influences in a bidirectional way our brain and our body, creates emotions, changes our energetic states, our physiological processes. This is absolutely fascinating. In the recent decades, advances in psychoneuroimmunology, neuroendocrinology, and integrative medicine have provided increasing evidence that the emotional experiences are not confined to the psychological domain, but instead they exert measurable and often profound effects on the body's physiology and consequently on health outcomes. This is nothing new. The wonderful part of all of this is that if we look at Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, many of the traditional medicines that are part of the world, we see how they lead us to understand how our body responds to any type of stimuli, be it emotionally internally or be it physical externally, that creates also an emotion. Under clinicians, therapists, and researchers seeking to promote effective healing processes and to address both acute and chronic diseases within a psychosocial, and bioenergetical framework, which corresponds, the bioenergetical framework corresponds to functional physiology. Throughout the years, I've been teaching, and every once in a while, more than once in a while, I end up changing or actually modifying, adding new pathways that come out with research on what happens when we are networking all the stimuli that we receive that come in, and we network the responses that go out. This is when I was studying medicine way back, and they talked to me about, afferent and afferent nerves. It was hard to understand then, because what we learn in medicine is totally physical. Now, a little bit better on the emotional and psychological basis, but as far as integrating complementary natural therapies, we're still a little bit behind. If we think about the fact that emotions are an integral component of human physiology, exerting profound effects on neural, endocrine, immune, and energetic systems. Once we would talk about the endocrine and the immune, and then we started talking about the nervous system. And today we're starting to hear a little bit more about the energetic system. These aren't individual systems. These are networks that are connected. There's a lot of interconnection dealing with everything that we do. Contemporary research in psychoneuroimmunology and neuroendocrinology has elucidated the biological pathways. And this is the wonderful part. This is the wonderful part of medicine. research that we can start understanding how stimuli, molecules can affect the different ways of our body that responds on a biological basis. These pathways through which emotional experience influences homeostasis and health outcomes. Now we are starting to see much more of this, and we are starting to be able to connect. As we go along, I will review current understandings of the emotional, energetic, physiological continuum, examining its implications for the healing process. You see, the way I see it, and this is a personal vision, is that we actually have a responsibility of giving our body the best possibility of reactivating the healing processes that have been created within our system. This is fundamental. We need to add at times certain things, call it pharmaceuticals or call it surgery, because the damage is a little bit heavier than we can take care of with natural systems. But if we start thinking in a preventive way, if we start thinking of exchanging this information with the younger generations of doctors, of caregivers, of people in the holistic world, we will start working in a way that emotional regulation, atomic balance, and energetic coherence will become essential, and they will be of fundamental understanding, helping us to maintain health and promote recovery. What we need to do is we need to highlight the need of integrative models that unite biomedical and psychosocial perspectives. If we think that all these points, neurobiology, energetics, psychophysiological continuum, psychophysiological relations with emotional stress, emotional states, and healing, all of this is regulated by our brain, which receives from other areas, other brain areas. We are discovering now ever more the importance of the gut system, microbiome and gut system. We have to put all this together. That is what I have programmed for my teachings. This is what I try to teach with the new students and the doctors. What is the neurobiological mechanism of emotional processing? Emotions arise from a complex interaction of the cortical and subcortical structures, including amygdala, hypothalamus, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex. So this, if we look at the brain structure, we're going to see how much of the brain is interested in working all this out. These networks integrate sensory input, memory, meaning attribution, orchestrating behavioral and physiological responses. So we cannot think that the amygdala works on its own and the prefrontal cortex is something separate and it's only interested in dementia. There's a lot more. There's a lot more that has to do with the sensory input, and we could read this backwards. We could read it from sensory input to the amygdala to the emotions. Let's not forget that the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, the HPA axis, plays a central role by converting emotional stimuli into hormonal outputs. We have to remember that. That's a fundamental point, because these are hormonal outputs regulate cardiovascular, metabolic, and immune functions. And this was evidenced in a study by McGowan in 2007. So if we want to look at it, it's past research, but it was an eye-opener at that time. Acute emotional response activates the sympathetic nervous system, increasing cardiac output, respiratory rate, and the energy substrate availability. Therefore, we're talking about the adrenal system. This adaptive fight or flight reaction enhances short-term survival And it's fundamental, it's important. We would not be here today if we didn't have this reaction. But when it becomes chronic, it contributes to an allostatic load, a cumulative physiological cost associated with prolonged stress. This was stated by McOwen back in 1998. So, what's the biggest problem that we are living? Chronic stress, chronic emotional stress, chronic surplus of stimuli. We are not getting enough rest. We're not having enough time to nourish our body. And I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about, for example, spiritual, energetical. Okay? Persistent sympathetic activation and cortisol dysregulation are linked to hypertension, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, immune dysfunctions. This was stated in a study by Thayer and Lane in 2000. So we're already progressing here. And conversely, emotions associated with safety, love, and gratitude, and how much are we missing in our society the sense of safety, the profound sense of true love, which is not to deal with interest, and gratitude. Unfortunately, in many, many cases, gratitude has seemed to be a word that has been canceled in the dictionaries. All of these enhance the parasympathetic system via the vagus nerve. And we're starting to understand how the vagus nerve is, how it has become in our body through evolution, such an important factor. Whereas 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we really didn't talk about the vagus nerve that much because it promotes relaxation, digestion, tissue repair. These observations reinforce the notion that emotional stresses act as regulators of physiological homeostasis, influencing disease vulnerability and recovery trajectories, so long as this stress is not continuous and not harsh, because our bodies can just take so much. When we talk about the energetics and the physiological content, while biomedicine traditionally emphasizes biochemical signaling, emerging evidence supports the existence of bioenergetic communications within human organisms. And we're starting to see that a lot with quantum research. Concepts drawn from traditional Chinese medicine, Qi, Ayurveda, Prana, yogic physiology, nadis, and chakra, describe energy as a dynamic informational substrate underlying physiological coherence. If these areas, the Qi, the Prana, the Nadi, the chakra, and much more, are not aligned amongst them, we do not have a coherent message. And our body goes into deep confusion. Contemporary biofield science investigates measurable electromagnetic and quantum level correlates of these traditional constructs. This is a study done by Rubric and colleagues in 2015. We know that the energetic field is something we produce. Yeah, we produce it. And all of you are sitting here, I'm not going to go into it because we could all talk about it for hours and hours. The problem is that at times it cannot be demonstrated on a scientific basis, but it exists and it regulates so many different things and so many different capabilities of our body. Intuition, the human biofield. Intuition is something that is ahead of accurate knowledge. This sentence was of Nikola Tesla. Unfortunately, science has somewhere down the line almost forgotten about intuition. The biofield is a composition of various fields produced by ions, molecules, cells, and energy, which make a complex human system with immense electromagnetic capabilities. That means it produces energy. And the energy, if I wanted to see, I don't know if Dr. Professor Sojo is on, but he could talk about it extensively. When we talk about energy, let's remember we're talking is something at a cellular level, and that influences the mitochondria that have a very, very important um, status in our body, where we are discovering that ever more. The biofield generated by these charged particles condensed to create a visible body to the eye, yet has electron clouds which extend into space, interacting with the fields in its environment. That is why, for example, in native traditions, they say we are all connected. We are connected to everything that surrounds us, everything that is living. Harold Saxon Burr and Filmer Northrop wrote the electrodynamic theory of life, which states, and I took this because I found it very appropriate. The microscopic physiochemical constituents do determine the character of the field. No one cognizant of modern physics and physiological chemistry can deny this. But this relation between field and particle is not, as traditional modern science theory has assumed, an asymmetrical or a one-way relation. The field both determines and is determined by the particles. And that leads us to a consideration. Our energetical field, which is a shield, interacts with what happens. And it also interacts with what happens on an emotional basis. I use this example many times with my students. I say, we've all fallen in love, okay? And now we're out in the Italian Alps in Cortina d'Ampezzo, about 5 to 7 degrees below zero centigrade. It's snowing. We walk out and we go to the nearest hotel where the person that we're in love with is staying. And we're in a t-shirt. And we stay out there and sing songs for an hour. We go back to the hotel, take a hot shower, go to bed, and you're fine. You do not catch a cold. Well, time passes, summer comes up, and with my girlfriend, we go to the Maldives or we go to a summer resort on the sea. Beautiful. A little bit of a breeze, very hot, nice sunny. And we're drinking something. And my girlfriend says, look, I'm sorry, it's over. It's finished. And she walks. 3 days after, we have a bronchitis. Think about it. That's what happens. That's what happens to our body. Why? Because the electromagnetic field permeates and surrounds the human body, and sometimes referred to as the body's subtle energy field. Let's remember that when we talk about subtle body energy fields, doctors, every once in a while, a lot of them squirmish a bit. And they say, hey, but this is hypothetical. Okay. Electroencephalographic machines, electrocardiographic machines measure the electric activity, which is a biofield of the brain and the heart. So, excuse me, we depend on these for diagnostics, and yet you're not understanding that that energy field that you're actually working on, which is an electrical activity, is the same as the energy field that results in our body. There are traditional clinical tools. These are, traditional clinical tools that also provide data about the biofield, since electrical currents generate magnetic fields. I would like to remind all of us that the transmission of the nervous system, at one point when it comes to the synapses, is bioelectrical chemical. You've got the electrical coming in, and you have a biochemical reaction that restimulates an electrical going out. So we cannot deny it. The picture here is an infrared photo, and the infrared is based on temperature. Why is there a difference? Because the temperature creates a different bioelectrical field. Now, what happens if we are not coherent anymore? Disruption of energetic coherence, whether due to physiological, psychological trauma, emotional expression, or chronic stress, can manifest as physiological dysregulation and somatic diseases. Empirical evidence supports associations between emotional suppression and increased inflammatory cytokine activity. So we have a reactivity of the body on a molecular basis, on a cellular basis, impaired immunity, and poor outcomes in chronic illness. This is a study of 2002. So what happens? There's a lot of things that, well, let me put it this way. There's not a lot of things. Everything that happens in our body has to do with coherence of these fields. Biofield therapy and practice. The Palo Alto University, in an article, states that over 1.6 million American adults annually seek service of energy healing therapy practitioners, making biofield therapy a popular choice for many seeking holistic wellness. Okay, that's interesting. According to a survey by the NCCIH involving 31,000 participants, 55%, therefore more than half of these participants, reported improvements in their overall health through complementary health approaches, including biofield therapies. These non-invasive techniques enhance well-being and rejuvenation by manipulating the body's subtle energy field. Now, when we talk about manipulation, I would like just to put one out there. What about epigenetics? And I'm not going to say more than that. Stress reduction. Biofield therapy techniques such as Reiki, therapeutic touch, have found to induce deep relaxation, helping clients reduce stress and anxiety levels. There are more techniques that do that, but this is what they wrote at the Palo Alto University. Emotional stress, emotional regulation. By rebalancing the energy flow within the biofield therapy helps people regulate their emotions more effectively and experience greater emotional resilience. And this, for example, happens every time we breathe in an essential oil. Excuse me, my phone just took off. Siri just started making a comment. Every time we listen to music, every time we do specific movements or even non-specific movements, just taking a beautiful walk. And it doesn't have to be necessarily always in the middle of nature. But if we are present and we listen to what happens while we walk, there is a big change in our reactions in our body. Enhanced self-awareness. Practicing biofield therapy can deepen clients' awareness of their energetic bodies, fostering a greater connection between mind, body, and spirit. Complementary support. Biofield therapy can complement traditional therapeutic modalities by addressing energetic imbalances that may contribute to mental health. And we can help in depression, anxiety, trauma. We also can help in problems dealing with dementia, and so on. Promoting mind and body integration. By integrating the biofield therapy into mental health practice, Professionals can promote holistic healing that addresses the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit. So as you see, we're starting to understand a lot. The physiology of stress. Now, this is the silly reactivity curve. Okay, we reach an optimal performance under a certain amount of stress. What happens if the stress continues is that we go into a burnout. Okay, so stress exemplifies the convergence of emotion, physiology, and energy. Acute stress response is an evolutionary, adaptive, mobilizing resource to confront immediate threats, though chronic activation of the HPA axis results in persistent cortisol secretion, mitochondrial dysfunction, and oxidative stress, ultimately leading to neuronal atrophy in the hippocampus and in the amygdala. So think of what happens in our brain and what we start losing. When we look at the psychophysiology of stress, clinically, chronic stress causes this and much more. Cognitive appraisal and emotional regulation determine the magnitude and the chronicity of this physiological cascade. Interventions that promote emotional resilience and adaptive coping, such as mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic awareness, and much more, have been shown to modulate stress physiology and improve clinical outcomes. You would think that this research done by Cabot and Zim is very recent. No, it dates back to 1998. Well, look at this. This is a very, very simple. Emotions deal with the nervous system, that deals with the immune system, that deals with the the nervous central system. Psychoneuroimmunology provides compelling evidence of the bidirectional communication between central nervous system and immune system. And just to state, positive emotions such as optimism, compassion, and gratitude, we're sort of lacking that in our modern life. Enhance natural killer cell activities, improve antibody response to vaccinations, reduces systemic inflammation. Cohen, 2012. Conversely, chronic negative emotions, including grief, hostility, and hopelessness, we've got a lot of that in our society today, are associated with immune suppression and delay wound healing. Let's start thinking about a lot of the diseases that we find today. Emotional states and immune infection, vagus nerve inflammatory reflex, vagal enhancement, induced inflammatory markers. The vagus nerve mediates this interaction through the inflammatory reflex, a mechanism that modulates the cytokinins released via cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathways, studied by Tracy in 2002. Enhancing vagal tone through controlled breathing, meditation, yoga activity, or mindfulness movement increases parasympathetic activity and reduces inflammatory markers. That's why the people who come and do things, they say, oh, I feel much better. I don't have as much pain. I don't feel so inflamed. These findings highlight a physiological bridge linking emotion regulation, energetic balance, and immune competence. We're starting to understand what happens when the people leave and they come back the day after or 2-3 days after and they say, oh, I feel so different. I feel so much better. Healing represents the restoration of dynamic equilibrium across biological, physiological, and energetic dimensions. Healing has to do with all of what's written in this slide and much more. It's not just a cellular factor. When we look at the emotional regulations of the healing process, we have an immune function, a tissue repair, and we also deal with pain. Emotional regulation plays a critical role in this process by influencing immune, tissue repair, and pain perception. Clinical studies have demonstrated that the patients with higher emotional well-being recover more rapidly from surgery, experiencing less postoperative pain and they exhibit improved immune parameters. Kita and Steptone, 2008, the study. Positive effect. For example, emotional well-being, positive mood, joy, happiness, vigor, and energy, and positive trait-like dispositions, satisfaction, hopefulness, optimism, sense of humor, were associated with induced mortality in population studies. Positive psychological well-being was significantly associated with a reduced cardiovascular mortality rate in healthy population studies, and with the reduced rates in patients with renal, kidney failure, and human immunodeficiency towards viral infections. Just think how much simple states of mind, how much using different attitudes with words, and so on can regulate our outcome in life. Emotional dysregulation brings on anxiety, fear, unresolved traumas, which give intensification of pain and impaired treatment adherence. In contrast, when we have dysregulation, what happens? We have a lower adherence to treatment. We have an intensification of pain through central sensitization, and the healing is delayed. Integrating emotional assessment and clinical and support into the medical care enhances both patient outcome and therapeutical alliance. This was a study first in 1998 by Kabat and Zim, and then repeated by Rubik in 2015. So over the years, this still is valid. I'm coming to the end now. Complementary interventions such as mindfulness-based stress regulation, yoga therapy, aromatherapy, music therapy, and much more may further support autonomic balance and energetic coherence, facilitating making it easier to recover. This is a scheme of what was said in these two studies. Now, my final comments. Emotions are not abstract mental phenomena, but are embodied energetic processes that shape physiology, influence disease trajectories, determining healing potentials. The integration of emotional, energetic, and physiological knowledge within the clinical practice represents a paradigm, a paradigm shift towards truly holistic medicine. Holos, unity, we are seen as one with a problem, not the problem with me. Recognizing the patient as a multidimensional being, biological, physiological, and energetic, enables more accurate diagnosis, personalized treatments, and sustainable recovery. Not to talk about the fact that there's much more contact between the caregivers and the patients, which is healing in itself. Future research should continue to explore the mechanisms linking emotion, energy, and physiology with the aim of developing clinical tools capable of measuring and modulating these interactions. We're part of all this. How many of us actually sit down and write out the outcomes of their therapies with their patients, and we use a clinical chart? Evidence-based. Emotional awareness and energetical coherence may ultimately prove to be as vital to health as nutrition, genetics, or pharmacology. I would like to leave us with these ideas. Mental and emotional must work together to create health, because the two brains, the two different areas specific of our brains, react as one, and they create what we call health, well-being, and a better quality of life. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm open to any questions, but above all, I would like to stress to all of us that we should actually take care of noting what we do and the effects, and then take time to sit down and go back and look what happened, how it happened, what is the research behind it, because we are the ones who will be bringing more information. Because all of us know that medical research has to be financed. And who finances it mostly are pharmaceutical companies. They're not interested in this, but we are. We are starting to see more and more interest, but we are the ones who can make the big difference. Thank you all very